welcome back to the Consultancy podcast. My guest today is Martin Mehalchin, who is a seasoned executive who's lived the exact journey that many of you are navigating right now. Martin was a core member of the leadership team that built the boutique firm Lenati this is based in Seattle, into a large nationally recognized customer strategy and experience design powerhouse. So Martin helped guide the firm through a successful 2018 merger with PK, which was a PE-backed firm, after which the team scaled from 120 to 500 people. So quite a significant scaling. And it's a real pleasure to have you here, Martin. You haven't just had one exit, you've had two successful exits, and you now apply your playbook to advise a variety of firms, but not least small and mid-sized consultancies. So thank you for joining us and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Happy to be here.
And Martin, before we jump into the more qualitative side of things, how did you get to what are the key events in your life that took you to Lenati, or did you join them? Did you start it quite young?
Basically, I'll start the story, after I got my MBA, which was at the end of the last century. And I went, as many MBAs do, I went straight into consulting from there. 1 year at KPMG, where I kind of, learned the business, learned the big firm model. And then I jumped from there to a boutique that was based in Boston called Emergence Consulting, that was focused on bringing quote unquote academic methodologies and applying them with corporate clients. So the big one was the balanced scorecard.
Okay.
So that was, a great education in kind of the fundamentals of business from every angle and how they ladder together to drive customer and financial outcomes. And then a second methodology that we were involved in commercializing was blue ocean strategy and value innovation. And that was important for my career because that was really a methodology and school of thought that was focused on customer growth and value propositions, and really oriented towards, working with the front of the house, working with not only strategy teams, but also sales and marketing teams. So fast forward, we had moved out to Seattle. I had taken a corporate job for a while, but then was looking to get back into consulting, and found this little gem of a firm that had been founded, a few years before I joined, that was focused on that front of the house aspect, customer growth, and what became known as CX, right? So Lenati was early in terms of being a firm that was focused on CX, and that really aligned with what I had enjoyed doing most at Emergence, was those growth strategies and looking at things through the lens of the customer. And that's kind of how I got where I ended up with Lenati, and that began a almost 15-year run, helping to grow that firm, and then leading teams in the firms that acquired us.
Yeah, great. It's interesting you mentioned the methodologies, because often I'll say to people, "How did you get to where you are?" And they'll focus on a bit of luck here and there, and then they met the right person, but they rarely emphasize the methodologies that they learn, and that's quite an interesting piece, especially for new consultants coming up through the ranks and having to learn some of these methods.
Yep. And then, by the time I was a partner at Lenati, like we had methodologies around specific practices. We had a methodology for designing loyalty programs, but in terms of the, methodologies earlier, or, the big frameworks, right, we were more flexible than that, but I had just internalized that learning from earlier in my career, right? So there was, almost second nature.
And that positioning on what eventually became CX, was that a process that you took the firm through, or was it like we're doing CX and that's our specialism? And I guess how did you come to that, and how did it evolve over the time you were there?
Yeah, so it was, it was set by the way the partnership at Lenati was structured was there were three founders who were the initial partners, and then
Yep.
myself and one other who joined later who became partners during the growth of the firm. So the founders really set that tone and set that focus around CX. And
Yep.
I think it was basically because, it's what they enjoyed doing and what they felt they were best at. And then that's what attracted me to the firm for the same motivations. And then it just turned out that we had great timing, right? Because this was like, 2007 is when I joined Lenati.
Okay.
So right around the same time that Forrester declares, it's the age of the customer, and gets, C-suite attention with that. And then the iPhone comes out and the mobile revolution,
Mm,
completely changes consumer expectations for what experiences should be like, and companies have to respond. Even on the B2B side, the emergence of SaaS completely changed buyer expectations and how companies had to respond. So we were just, had we did it because it was what we were interested in, but it ended up that we had, fantastic timing in terms of, being early on the wave.
that's great and very foresightful of you. Um, or lucky. One of the, luck
One or
always
the
plays a
other.
part. One or the other. And just I often go into firms and they'll say, they might be organizational psychologists and they'll say, oh, we do brilliant organizational psychology work, but we're useless at applying it to ourselves. Or you go into a strategy firm, they do great strategy work for their clients, but they're useless at doing it for themselves. To what extent did you apply CX to your own firm? And I guess if you did so, how did that manifest itself? Or was your CX, it couldn't have been that bad because you came to a successful conclusion. So I'm guessing the question is, how did that manifest in your firm?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very client centric, but we were actually employee centric first. And ironically, after PK was acquired by Concentrix, the CEO of Concentrix really crystallized our approach and described it. But it was kind of when I realized it was retroactive. But his philosophy, which was really what we did too, was take care of the employees. The employees will take care of the clients, and in the long run, the clients will take care of you.
Okay.
And that works very well when you're a private partnership and can kind of ride out some of the variability or inconsistency in that. But, that
Hmm.
definitely works in the aggregate, works well over time. I think in our industry, as more and more companies become publicly traded, right,
Mm.
it's harder to hew to that line because of the pressures around, quarterly earnings and
Yep.
linear growth to please the markets and all that.
Yep.
But it's certainly, in my mind, it is the right way to, build a small to medium-sized firm to have a loyal base of clients and a basis upon which you can exit.
Yeah, great, great. And you will get onto the PE story later, but it's PE is a different beast sometimes, and that can
Yep.
sometimes affect your, long-term investments, I guess, versus that three or 4 year horizon.
Right.
But we'll come on to that later. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the growth of Lenati. You went from quite a sort of local, and in the States, this is the equivalent of going from one country to the whole of Europe, I guess.
Right.
So when I say local to regional to national, it's actually a huge shift for firms. What what were the decisions that led to that successful growth? And I guess also, what would you have done differently if you'd had that time over again?
Yeah. So it's a big part of the story is that we were based in Seattle and founded in Seattle, and Seattle is a interesting market from a consulting perspective because Microsoft is here. And Microsoft spends an enormous amount on professional services, over $1 billion a year. I think they're probably the largest private sector client in the United States. Maybe JP Morgan Chase is close or bigger, but definitely one of the top three. And so that means is there's a lot of consultants in Seattle, and there's also a lot of consulting firms that have been started in Seattle.
Hmm.
So, Point B and Slalom were early firms that were started in Seattle and based around Microsoft, and then became pretty well known nationally. And their innovation was they pioneered the local model, right? Like you can be a consultant but never get on an airplane and just serve local
Yeah.
clients.
Wonderful
And
life.
yeah, the way they grew was they, started once Seattle was established, they started stamping out local franchises with the same model in other big cities.
Okay.
Um, so for us, Microsoft was the low-hanging fruit in the beginning. We were, incredibly concentrated there for the first few years, like, many firms in Seattle are. But we had that differentiated focus on CX from the beginning. We weren't just, we do project management well, which was the value prop of a lot of the firms that tried to copy Point B and Slalom. And so we had that differentiated focus on CX. And client diversification was on our mind from the beginning. So, when I joined the firm, I brought in, a couple of logos that were not Microsoft. But it was kind of fits and starts, partly because the financial crisis got in the way. And,
Yeah, sure.
some of those smaller clients needed to pull back. And so we kind of, circled the wagons and focused on Microsoft again for a couple of years. Um, but then once that stabilized, we started looking at other verticals. And the one that I was most involved in and that took off the strongest in the long run was retail and consumer. And we picked that one for several reasons. One, there were other anchor accounts in Seattle, Starbucks and Nordstrom, among them that were, well-respected retail accounts and also, very large companies at the time.
Hmm.
Um, Second, CX is really central to that, right? Like consumer experience is just, absolutely central to the retail business. And then third, we guessed correctly that our knowledge of the tech space from working with big clients like Microsoft would be seen as valuable by the retail clients. Like we could help kind of translate between the two industries for them. And that became a big piece of what we did. Um, and so the way we grew from there, right, is um, local clients first. So we got into Starbucks, we got into Nordstrom. Those developed case studies, right? And so we used those case studies to start selling outside the region, and and some of our clients went to other retailers or brands outside the region, and we were able to follow them. Um, and then it was a mix of, going to conferences, generating more case studies, getting analyst attention, particularly from Forrester, right? And over a 3 or 4 year period, we grew to a place where, we had clients across North America and more of a national reputation, and where, Microsoft was still our largest client, but
Hmm.
the other slices of the pie had grown faster than Microsoft. So the firm as a whole had grown while the Microsoft share
Right.
of the overall pie had shrunk a bit. Um, and we could ride out the variability in any one client or any one market, right? And continue to have a stable firm and keep
Yeah.
everybody on the team and not need to do reductions when one client slowed down, those types of things.
Great. Great. It's a wonderful model if you can make it work. Sort of having the opportunity to really get your methods, practice, and proposition hammered out whilst under the umbrella of a nice, big, safe client, and
Yeah,
then using that to, in effect, roll out elsewhere. Um,
yeah.
I've seen a few. Not everyone is lucky enough to be able to do that, but I've seen it work very successfully with a few high growth firms, and it really, even if you're listening to this, and I guess you haven't got that umbrella, it does speak to the importance of getting your niche really, really like a well-oiled machine before you
Mhm.
start doing dozens of other things.
Right. And within retail, we discovered that loyalty was a great niche. And that was actually another member of our leadership team who really developed that practice. And it meshed so well with the retail practice. And one of the reasons that was successful is that loyalty is a very defined um, service offering and
Hmm.
niche. So it's almost, it's productizable, right? So it's, the
Sure.
and whereas CX is kind of more amorphous, and like you put five people in a room and ask them to define what the CX space is, and you'll get five different definitions. Loyalty is, more cut and dried and more amenable to kind of a productized offering. So that really helped the flywheel spin.
Yeah, great, great. Yep. And it doesn't suit every firm, but that productizing, especially these days, getting it down to those steps and the methods and the support and the training to support the people who are doing that,
Yep.
it's huge opportunity costs and better margins for everyone.
Right.
um, I wanted to ask a little. You mentioned earlier about when I mentioned value proposition, you gave quite an unusual answer, but not that unusual amongst high performing firms, which is that you talked about the employees as as almost the first base. So that positioning as a talent acquisition tool, how
Hmm.
did that work in practice? And what effects did you see on the employees that made it, you knew it was working, it made it worthwhile?
Right. Um, so I think in the early days, well, and throughout really, but that the specialist positioning around CX was a talent attractor as opposed to, larger firms or even, competitive firms that had a more diffuse focus and couldn't, articulate like, here's the kind of problems you're going to go solve for clients as crisply as we could. So, we attracted the kind of talent that wanted to work on the problems we worked on. Um, and then, in terms of, once folks were there, um, it again, the people who thrived with us were people who were going to be client centric and really, got satisfaction from serving clients well. And but we also promoted a very, entrepreneurial culture. So, practices were founded by non-partners. Key elements of how we operated were established by non-partners.
Okay.
Our whole training program was called Foundations, and it was really run by the manager level of the firm, not
Right.
the leadership level of the firm. Um, and there was no fixed like time at level or anything like that. You could rise up as fast as your performance dictated. And we also, and we had associates who had, big pedigrees and MBAs from top schools and all that, but we did not use that as a filtering criteria, right? Some of our best people went to little regional colleges around Seattle, and so unlike some firms, we didn't really focus on like, how
Mm,
impressive your resume looks on paper. It's like, what have you accomplished and what are you capable of doing?
great. Great. And what effects did, I mean, how was churn? What did churn look like? Did you mostly promote internally? So what were the effects of that investment?
Yeah, so churn was pretty low, very below industry standard, right? Like consistently in that 10 to
Right.
15% range, where a lot of firms are more up around 20-25. Um, and then with rare exceptions, we pretty much promoted from within. So people grew within the firm. That had a robust manager community, and we only really brought in a couple of senior hires from outside, and usually those were people that were kind of well known to us from we had worked with them inside the same client or had worked with them in previous stops in our career. So there were only a few of those.
Great.
And there were a few actually outside hires that didn't work out that well, which, made us more selective and cautious about senior outside hires as we, went forward.
It's I think it's one of the most common what would you do differently answers to that question. The number of people that appointed senior hires and spent a lot of money sometimes and they didn't
Right.
work out. And sometimes it was, it was cultural rather than just a bad hire, which is hard to predict. But it's tough to get that level, especially when it comes to business development, to get that level of person in if they haven't come up through the firm.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that. You were acquired by PK, who were backed by Carlyle,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. I've shifted over the last 10 years. I've shifted my take on PE investments directly. It's PE used to have a bit of a reputation. It seems to me that over the last 10 years they've got more sophisticated when they're dealing with people firms. But
Hmm.
how was that experience for you? I guess there's a question actually before we get to the experience of PE. Why did you decide to go for a PE backed firm rather than either a non PE backed firm or a direct PE investment or an MBO or any of the other options that
Yeah.
you guys would have had?
Yeah, so we went through a process and kind of, all of the kind of serious final round bidders were PE firms or PE backed.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
So it's just kind of where the market was at the time.
Right.
Um, and you know, and we chose PK and Carlisle, obviously for financial reasons, but also for fit reasons that we experienced, kind of during the bidding process and the leadership teams getting to know each other.
Yep.
Um, and so, um, car part of the reason it was such a strong fit and we had such a strong experience was that um, the acquisition of Lenati was part of a deliberate Carlyle strategy for PK, which was to, elevate PK and differentiate that firm as a CX focused specialist. So they were, a digital development firm, digital outsourcer, um, and grew just kind of by the grit of the founders and kind of an amazing growth story on its own, which is a topic for another day and probably another guest. Um, but they were didn't have that kind of crisp value prop focus, and Carlyle thought that CX was the direction to head with that, and digital experience in particular. So acquiring Lenati was part of elevating PK and really adding that value prop focus to that firm. So, we knew we were a strategic target, not just adding revenue, adding headcount, or adding a service line, but really, viewed as a potentially transformational acquisition.
Hmm.
Um, so that was a big part of the appeal in both directions.
And it reminded me that I mean, we'd been connected for a while, but it was something I wrote about private equity, and you reached out and said, well, actually, Joe, we had a really good experience,
Yep.
and we had, a second bite at the cherry, as it were, because I presume some of your shares rolled over into PK shares. Um,
Yep.
and sometimes owners can do better out of the second exit than they can the first. So I'm interested as to what made that investment so successful. Um, and you're taking a bit of a risk when you do that, because you hear the narrative, and of course everyone's got a good narrative, but it's still an unknown, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. So Carlisle did a number of things that made it a positive experience, and I think contributed to the outcomes in the end, right? So One was we had PK had a strong board and a strong group of advisors that knew the business. So that the chairman of the board had been the CEO of the corporate executive board, so he really understood professional services and kind of high-end strategy work very well. Um, Another one of the non-board advisors had been the CEO and CFO of a large, in India-centric outsourcer before. So he understood, kind of the legacy PK side of the business very
Yeah.
well. It was very helpful. And then PK's largest client was a telco, and another board member had been on the FCC, on the board of the FCC before, Federal Communications Commission.
Wow. Okay.
All those board members like understood the business and were, super helpful in both, advising us and helping us grow, but also, explaining our business back to the rest of Carlyle and the deal leads at Carlyle and things like that.
Great.
So that was one piece. Second piece is how integration was handled, right? So they didn't rush to rebrand everything and force kind of smashing the two firms together, right? So they allowed those of us at Lenati, especially in the first year, to just, kind of continue to operate as we had and continue the, rapid growth that we had been experiencing pre-deal, right? Which made us an attractive acquisition target. They let us, kind of
Sure.
keep that going, which meant that the clients were reassured that, not much was changing for them, right?
Mm.
In terms of what was being delivered, just broader capabilities available if they wanted to leverage them. And it also helped us really, kind of lock in that employee culture and you're going to continue to have the same uh, em employment experience and the same opportunities for growth, if not more, than what you had before the acquisition was kind of the message that I think the employees received, right? And then
Great.
after, and there were some early wins there, right, in terms of joint sales. So we were doing a loyalty program for a large sneaker brand, which is something we had done before for other brands, but in this case, because we were now part of PK, we were able also to pick up the development and maintenance of that brand's mobile app, which is something we probably wouldn't have done as Lenati alone.
Okay.
So there were early proof points. And then after a year, right, we kind of retired the Lenati brand, went with PK as the brand for all firms under the umbrella, and started to drive more back office integration and also sales integration and delivery integration, and then continued to grow from there. Um, and when we sold, we were about 120 people. As you mentioned in the intro, right? What became the strategy and design arm of PK, peaked out around 500 people. And I think, in that 120 range with plus some more secure financial backing, we were right at that inflection point where you're, large enough to really start going after bigger and bigger programs, and delivering more, left to right end-to-end services to clients. And then, once you win a few of those, right, that growth curve can really accelerate
Hmm.
because you just start, picking up programs, 20 heads at a time, $5-10 million mandates, right? And then that kind of reinforces itself as long as the market's doing well, which it was a period where the services market was doing very well.
Right. But it sounds like a case study story, which is relatively rare. So yeah, well done on managing that. And in terms of lessons learned, is there anything either that you would do differently around especially the growth bit, or around the sales process, or it almost on the other side, is there anything that really stands out as something that really worked for you that perhaps people in your position 5 years ago could learn from?
Yeah, so I mean, 2020 hindsight wise, I mean, we had a couple of opportunities to have maybe like, done tuck-in acquisitions of smaller firms around disciplines like UX and analytics. So, 2020 hindsight, because everything turned out well, and some of the worries or concerns that stopped us from doing that, in hindsight, we would have gotten past it fine. Um, those probably would have been worth doing because it just would have, made us bigger revenue, and more scope. So it would have, led to a bigger acquisition. But also, analytics in particular is just was for us at least was a super tough space. A lot of false starts. Those were some of the external hires that didn't work out. So there was a lot of distraction trying to get a solid analytics practice
Hmm.
inside the firm. So an acquisition there may have been a small acquisition there may have been helpful and reduce that distraction. Um, but that's definitely like 2020, looking back, and minor things in the overall picture. Um, in terms of uh, the sale process, I mean, there's not a lot would do differently there. I thought that, obviously went very well for us. We had a great outcome. So
Right.
yeah,
Good.
hard to
Good.
hard to want to do different there. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Great, great. And since leaving, you've done a lot of advisory work for professional service firms. Um, I'd be interested in how you're seeing changes happening, because obviously, you've been in the game for a while, um, and I've been advising professional service firms for 20 odd years now, and I've certainly, especially in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot of changes. But I'd be interested, especially as you're in a different geography to me, and perhaps dealing with a different niche to me. What changes are you seeing that you think are affecting the boutique market in consultancy?
yeah, so I mean, the obvious one is AI, right? And so, all the firms are either struggling or thriving by working to integrate AI into how they operate. And I think, as other guests on this podcast have articulated, right, the place that brings the biggest change is in terms of onboarding junior staff, right? More the analyst level, because, AI can do a lot of the kind of market and competitive landscape research that you used to assign to an associate and say, hey, spend a week digging into this. Right now, you can generate it from AI and just kind of fine tune it and fact check it and be done in a
Yep.
day. Um, but what I've been, and I don't have a ton of clients. I'm definitely in the work optional phase and just, working with people I know and enjoy working with. But um, what I've been telling folks is a couple things. One, like, don't let that shiny object distract you from, the fundamentals of take care of the employees. Employees will take care of the clients, and that
Hmm.
whole narrative and approach, right? So you still have to do the blocking and tackling of that's always been true in professional services of what, keeps a firm healthy and growing. Um, but then the second thing is I really believe in the kind of learn by doing approach to new step changes like this and new
Yep.
technologies like this. So encouraging founders that I'm working with to really um, uh, have their teams be the ones who develop the AI capability and do it by
Hmm.
experimenting and make AI everyone's job, just like you make sales everyone's job.
Yep.
And rather than bringing in like an AI guru from outside and having them try to, like, force it from the top down.
Yeah. Great. Great, and it's definitely a competence that firms need to develop themselves so they can understand what it can do for them.
Right. And what it can do, what it can do for the clients, right? And just be, kind of,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's all change. Listen, Martin, thank you. So much there. Um, where can people find you if someone wanted to pick Martin's brains or speak about CX and the advisory work you're doing? Where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so the easiest is to just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've got a, fairly unusual last name, so I'm easy to find, and assume the spelling will be in the show notes.
It
And
will,
yeah,
yes.
folks can just look me up on LinkedIn and reach out.
We'll put a link to you, Martin. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Happy to join, Joe. Thanks.